G'day, mate. 40 here. So I have been able to make my way through any of the articles about Donald Trump's latest indictment for mishandling classified documents. I don't know what it is, and I don't know if there's any wisdom here, but I just start to get a headache when I read these articles about Donald Trump's indictment for mishandling documents. It seems to be, a fight over paperwork. It seems to be a fight over trivia. It seems to be a prosecution for something that's not particularly important. It seems to be a fight over record keeping. I mean, really? Is this what it's come down to? Is this, what the big deal is? That we're fighting over record keeping and what exactly belongs in the National Archives? It just seems so minor. And then the other thing that grabs my attention is that there are all these articles decrying how Donald Trump is stoking anger and fury. And I think, to the extent I'm able to pay any attention at all, yeah, I do think Donald Trump is stoking anger and fury. But what the hell was the Black Lives Matter movement? Wasn't that all about stoking anger and fury and how that was righteous? In fact, we had to supersede, get rid of, turn our back on, forget about all the COVID restrictions once George Floyd died, because the anger and fury of the Black Lives Matter movement, that outweighed every other moral consideration. That outweighed all COVID restrictions, which until then, and then for the 2 years after then, COVID restrictions were the preeminent moral issue of our time. Tell me that I'm wrong. 40, you're wrong. So if it's wonderful for Black Lives Matter to be, filling people with fury and anger, motivating people to go out and commit massive numbers of crimes. Yeah, I know 90% of Black Lives Matter rallies were mostly peaceful, but we've had an absolute explosion of murder, of crime, a deterioration in the quality of life. Millions of people have been frightened. Millions of people have pulled their heads in. Millions of people are less likely to volunteer to do anything in the wider society. People are much more likely in big cities and around big cities to stay home, right? Watch TV and not get involved in the wider community. People are more incentivized to work from home. The Black Lives Matter crime spree that it unleashed, along with a huge increase in traffic deaths and pedestrian deaths, right? This was all based on the notion that it was righteous to be filled with anger and fury. So hasn't this been the rallying call for left-wing protests, including for civil rights, that anger and fury are good, right? What Martin Luther King unleashed, wasn't that, good? Yeah, it led to an absolute explosion in murder rates and crime rates. But isn't that a good thing? So no justice, no peace. Remind me. Tell me I'm wrong about this. No justice, no peace. Is that something that comes from the left, or is that something that comes from the right? To the extent that I'm aware of that phrase being used in politics, it only comes from the left, right? The left has harnessed anger and fury to push its agenda, to disrupt the lives of ordinary people, to disrupt the lives of tens of millions of ordinary people, to incentivize a massive increase in crime rates, a massive increase in murder rates, a massive increase in rape rates and assault rates and grievous bodily harm rates, and just a general sense of mayhem and fear, right? But this was always, harnessed towards wholly left-wing causes. So on the other hand, it seems a very unlevel playing field. Remember the 1994 election, and I think Time Magazine did their cover story on angry white men. So it's bad for white men to be angry on behalf of conservative and Republican causes, but it's righteous if they were angry on behalf of Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ protests, or other, marginalized communities or sacred communities, right? What woke means is that there are groups that you may not criticize, right? You may not criticize blacks, Jews, Puerto Ricans, LGBTQ communities, right? They are above and beyond criticism. They are sacred communities, and you're not allowed to criticize them. And if they harness and they fuel anger and rage, that's a good thing. Luke Croft says Trump is a narcissistic criminal. Don't have a big argument either way. I'm just haven't been able to make myself, read through any of these latest Trump indictment stories. Left is smarter and has institutional power. Yeah, I think that's true. Right-wingers are impotent and stupid. Just look at the Trump rally in Miami, a cultish circle of ignorance. So the Republican Party and the American right has definitely gone down market over the past decade, particularly. But National Review started going down market in the 1980s. National Review, the premier journal of conservative thought in America, probably since the 1950s, all right, it used to be primarily written by professors. But starting about the 1980s, 90s, it became primarily written by pundits who don't really have anything to offer. And so there has been a very steady decline since the 1950s in the intellectual caliber of the right, of right-wing analysis of conservative political perspectives. I mean, it's probably the dominant theme on my show is how moronic, how low IQ the level of right-wing commentary is these days. It's just childish pickings. So let's play a little bit here from Mickey Kaus. He's talking about how two of the Republicans running for president, so I assume he means Tim Scott, and who's the other one, are gay. Who's the other one? Tim Scott and person is going to have more influence on him than anyone else. So why would you not want to know who is going to be influencing? Oh man, I totally screwed that up. All right, I don't think you heard any of that. Man, I blew it there. I blew it. I'm in the wrong.
Useful in politics. The default rule I found in Washington is, as a friend of mine put it, they're all gay. Okay, so.
But that's your whole theory of life, Mickey, is that they're all gay.
There are at least two members of the Republican presidential field who are in the closet.
And you know who they are?
I think so, yeah.
Well, tell us.
No. I don't believe in outing people.
Oh, wait.
It makes it larger. Okay. There's a larger general theoretical point about gays
Mickey,
succeeding in politics.
Mickey, Tim Scott. You're not. I can tell by your expression that that's one of them. Okay.
No, I don't do that. That has already started. People have already sort of tried to embarrass Tim Scott. And I guess I can't be pissed off at Gawker trying to out Peter Thiel and yet try to out other people. You should respect people. You should respect people. Well, that's the one saving grace. But you should respect people who are in the closet. So
yeah, that's
I'm just saying
true.
that
Nikki Haley.
I'm not
Why
saying
laugh?
that.
That's totally plausible. Why are you laughing at that? That's not funny, Mickey. This isn't funny.
No, I'm trying to think of somebody who's obviously who would be Chris Christie. I'm not saying Chris Christie dresses in women's clothing. Not saying he doesn't.
Oh, that's what I was going to tell you. It's like, I don't know. How do you explain this? So when I was a kid in El Paso, Texas, at this point, I'm like 9 years old. And the high school where my sisters went.
Wait, is he serious? He thinks Chris Christie is also gay? Is that what he's saying? Well, look, what's important is that we stop thinking of phone parties as gay. Right. There's more from Mickey.
Well, man, that was some serious fucking suicide bombs.
Right.
That was unbelievable. It also makes you wonder about Rubio. For people who don't remember it, Chris Christie said, all you do is recite talking points like some fucking parrot or something, and then Marco Rubio just repeats exactly the talking points he had just said. And Christie says, you're doing it now.
It's right. It was Marco Rubio. He blamed some consultant for telling him.
Always repeat your talking points when people are accusing you of being somebody who merely repeats talking points.
It's weird because Rubio is actually a very, very effective candidate.
Yeah, but it makes you wonder how. Does he just do his homework and memorize his talking points?
He does that, but he can be spontaneous and adaptive too, and he just wasn't there.
That was amazing.
And later on, when he was doing his sort of, he had a gay period in his campaign where he seemed like he was like mocking Trump's sexuality and talking about the side of his penis, and he was like floating across the stage like Liberace. He was hilarious and talented. But
Mickey, I don't remember.
Later in the campaign, the last phase of the campaign was mocking Trump for whatever something stupid Trump said about, I guarantee you that everything's all right in that department, by which he meant his sexual prowess.
Well, he meant the size of his love muscle.
Was that it? Okay. Well, then Rubio took off from that.
What?
Rubio took off from that. I
mean, that's when I thought, how low can American politics go? It was when it was, I think, because of the Stormy Daniels thing. I think Stormy Daniels had said it's smaller than for most men of that height. And he brought it up. And there had also been things about his hand size. You know, Spy Magazine decades ago had referred to him as a short-fingered Vulgarian. And he came out in one of the debates and like either he or somebody else alluded to it, and he said, I guarantee you there's no problem in that department.
Very important for him to set the record straight. But it was followed by going even lower, and Marco Rubio sort of based his last-ditch campaign on a pretty well-done stand-up routine. It seemed a little light in the loafers, you know? What can I say? I'm not saying anything about Marco, but I'm just saying.
So why are you willing to speculate that he's gay when you're not?
I have no reason to think he's gay. There is the foam
why are you rubbing yourself while you talk about him being gay?
There is the point. There was supposedly a picture of him at a foam party in Florida.
Yeah.
There are. If you wanted to make the case that Rubio was gay, you could build a semi-credible circumstantial case. But I'm told that you don't have to be gay to go to a foam party. It's like actually the most fun thing you'll ever do in your life.
Wait, what is a foam party?
You go. I guess you go to a pool and they spray foam around and you dance in the foam.
That sounds
like a giant bubble bath in your bathing suit.
In your bathing suit.
And it's like completely fantastically fun. And I know heterosexual women who've gone to them, and just we don't even know that Rubio was in this one because it was probably a fake photo. But it doesn't mean you're gay just because you go to a foam party.
Okay, I'm glad I know that.
Anyway, that wasn't my point. My point was just that. What was my point? My point was that for a guy who's as talented as Rubio is, to have fucked up that campaign as badly as he did is pretty impressive.
Makes you wonder if he's really talented. So, Mickey, go ahead.
I claim maybe these are all elaborately scripted jokes. I've seen him make what seem like spontaneous jokes, the way Cory Booker can make spontaneous jokes that drew a laugh just because he had a good sense of humor. So maybe I was conned, but I don't think so. That was the one article I wrote in that campaign was we should be very scared of Rubio because he's a talented politician, which makes him more of a threat on immigration than if he wasn't a talented politician.
Okay, so we had an interview by Matt from the History Speaks channel of Nathan Cofnas. This was a week ago. So here is Cofnas answering a question from our own Luke Croft. Why is the right so stupid?
Take a look at the paper.
Okay, last question. Maybe Luke Croft. Why did the far right, alt-right, become so stupid? That's an interesting question. Maybe you have a theory on that.
Well, I tweeted about this a few days ago. So conservatism and right-wing movements in general tend to become stupid. There, I think, are several reasons. One, why mainstream conservatism is stupid, and this is something that we disagree with, is I think leftism and wokeism are largely the logical consequence of the equality thesis. And so conservatives generally accept the equality, the premise that gives rise to wokeism, but then they deny its logical conclusions. And I'm not saying there can't be smart people who do that, or there can't be smart arguments.
Take your position, Nathan. We're coming on here to state your views. So
but okay, I won't try to be overly agreeable. I think smart people are going to be disproportionately drawn to wokeism if those are given those two options. Now, when you start an alternative movement that does acknowledge race differences, as the alt-right did, first you get a lot of attention from smart people who are looking for a political alternative that is rooted in what they see as the reality of race differences. You also get a lot of people with nothing to lose, people who are just very disagreeable and kind of against the world in general and just want to make trouble. You need mechanisms to filter out the people who are not going to be helpful to the movement if the movement is going to be successful, and to prevent them from being elevated into leadership positions. And the alt-right was never focused on that, just anybody who could get attention. This also happens in other right-wing circles, other conservative circles as well. So status is entirely determined by your ability to generate attention, and not really by the quality of the attention or the quality of your thoughts or your plans. So that's why right-wing leaders in general are much more often grifters than their leftist counterparts. Of course, you have grifters on the left too, but just the landscape on the right is dominated by grifters. And of course, the leaders of the alt-right were emphasized the Jewish stuff as
The linchpin.
a very important element of alt-right ideology, which was a wrong theory, which, well, the wrong theory, which gives rise to further stupidity, which attracts people who a mixed bag, and yes, and then it spirals out of control as it did.
Yeah, so I'm just going to push back a little bit on your first answer, Nathan. I think quite naturally. So yeah, I just to reiterate, as I said earlier, I don't accept the premise that because something is environmental, that therefore we can change it and should change it in terms of transforming culture. So if it is environmental, we don't know how to change it. Many environmental differences between groups are incorrigible, right? Or we don't know how to change them with social policy. So I don't think it follows that we have to have some woke Manhattan Project and deprecate meritocracy and have less competent people. So I would respect on that. One point I'd add, and I don't know if you agree with this, is critiquing what you said. It's just adding on to it. Is I tweeted the other day about how I think the conservative movement has too many lawyers and not enough philosophers, artists, novelists, historians among its intelligentsia. I just think there's oversaturation of lawyers among intellectuals on the right. Do you think that's a problem or no?
Well, I thought we have a problem in conservatism, that we have few intellectuals, few philosophers or philosophically minded people to think through ideas. And I myself became a conservative philosopher, and I discovered it's not that there are no people like this, but there's no market for people like this in the conservative
It's
world.
really interesting.
So I am just based on my academic papers. I mean, I've probably like the third most well-known millennial philosopher, or the third most widely read millennial philosopher in terms of my papers, which have academic papers in total about 400,000 downloads.
I can believe that because I can't think off the top of my head of any other millennial
Will
philosopher.
McCaskill, I say, would be one. Kate Mann, probably two.
Okay.
But in terms of papers, I'm definitely number one. My articles often do very well, just in terms of clicks and generating discussion. But I can't publish in legacy conservative outlets. They don't care what I have to say. My stuff gets rejected just based on the title. If I say, "Are you interested in this?" They'll just say, "Yeah, no, we don't care what you have to say." And so what they do, they publish an endless stream of articles on the same ideas about Chuck Schumer's a hypocrite, and
Elizabeth Warren's not really Elizabeth Warren's not really a 32nd Native American. I mean, it's like, yeah,
So why they just don't want to hear from somebody like me, because the idea of challenging their audience in any way is not something that they're interested in. The idea of entertaining subtlety or ideas that go beyond the very basic ideas that they're familiar with, they're just that's not part of the conservative movement.
Yeah, I think that's a serious problem, I think, for the right, that they really are hostile to intellectual life, I think, in the way the left isn't. As absurd as we may consider many premises the left has, there is like more of a respect for intellectuals in the left than the right. I think the right is very much drunk on populism right now.
Yeah, but there were supposed to be a small number of intellectual conservative outlets, but it's largely fake intellectualism.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, we're gonna get one more question, and then I gotta go work out. One more question from Nathan.
Okay, let's play a little bit more here from History Speaks. Matt talking with Nathan Cofnas.
Is that it's all just in our minds, and it's all just a psychological, sociological question, and not really a philosophical one. Then you're probably just...
So most of the first 20 minutes of the interview is a discussion of morality. Does morality exist outside of our minds? All right. Is there, for example, a transcendent reality to morality? Or according to Cofnas and also to Matt here, morality is just something that's purely subjective that exists in our minds.
Just going to drop out of the field. And then everyone who's left will be, or most of the people who are left are going to be moral realists. And
so a moral realist who believes that there are systems of morality that exist outside of the human mind. So that there is a reality to moral systems above and beyond individuals' subjective perceptions. So Cofnas does not believe that there's a reality to moral systems outside of the individual's subjective perspective.
Then it looks like there's all the support for moral realism because everyone because all the professional meta-ethicists
have gone to and all the people who are interested in a more objective framework have gone to epistemology or metaphysics or whatever, or to science.
Yeah, anything but meta-ethics.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you a little more pointed questions about your biography. So you have you've been in some level of trouble because of views, not because of anything you've done in terms of academic misconduct or anything like that, but because of views you've expressed on race and arguments that race could be linked to intelligence in some kind of biological sense. So I completely defend your freedom of inquiry. I would stand up with you and sign any petition if people were trying to vilify you. I think it's absurd. You can't go after people for.
You would sign the pro Cofnas.
No, yeah, 100%. Come on, yeah. I wouldn't be platforming you if I weren't anti. But I will challenge you on this point, and I think you'd run rings around me if we talked about the actual argument. I mean,
So this is the crazy thing that we live in. A channel with 320 subscribers. Okay, I've got channels with like 6,000 subscribers or 2,000 subscribers, right? When you have someone on and you got 300 subscribers, you're platforming them, right? This idea that History Speaks is platforming Nathan Cofnas because he's got a channel with 300 subscribers seems a tad stretch to me. But that is the way this is talked about. To even have people on with dissident views, right? You're platforming them is the left wing and the centrist critique, right? It's an attempt to try to narrow the Overton window of the type of people that you can talk to.
I'll just give you my a priori position, and I admit I'm politically biased. Like I don't want these claims.
Okay, so if you're doing an interview, there's no need to give your a priori position, right? There's no need to frame things in a moral way. There's no need to begin questions with stating your own feelings about a topic, particularly when you don't know anything about the topic. All right, Matt here from History Speaks knows virtually nothing about the topic, but yet he feels the necessity of stating his opinion before someone who knows a great deal about the topic. And earlier in the interview, talked about moral realism with Cofnas, a PhD in philosophy, right? And Matt doesn't have anywhere near the standing that Cofnas does in the field of philosophy. So it's ridiculous when you effectively know virtually nothing compared to the person you're talking about, and yet you're taking up all sorts of time and diminishing the vibe of an interview to give your ill-informed opinion.
Of biological differences that are relevant to intellect to be true. So I'll reflecting on that like last night, I'm like, yeah, I definitely have a political bias. Also, it just seems the priority seems very. I mean, a couple of the arguments given don't seem very compelling to me. So, okay, we've had 50 years of social policy that haven't worked to bridge the achievement gap between African Americans and whites. I mean, to infer from that okay, therefore genetic differences seems like a rather heroic leap. I mean, environmental differences can be very incorrigible, right? I mean, the example I gave on Twitter last night, and again, we're at fairly low discourse here because I don't have competence on this literature, frankly. But like,
yeah, it has. Matt from History Speaks come on my show probably half a dozen times. Yeah.
Just intuitively, there are plenty of environmental differences that are deeply, deeply incorrigible. Like, if we wanted to make Saudi Arabians Methodists.
So Matt is a historian in training. He's a PhD student at the London School of Economics in history. And he's got a debate coming up with Mike Enoch about Holocaust denial in 3 days.
That's environmental difference. They're not biologically Muslim, but we don't know how that would even be possible, right? So the fact that the differences are incorrigible doesn't seem to me to be a good argument for them being genetic. And also, like, I don't know, it just seems like, I mean, my undergraduate was in economics and also philosophy, but economics. And it just seems to me a bit of a stretch that we can cash out these claims about biology from constructs of social science, which and also like constructs in social science tend to be, as far as I recall, good social science theories are about predictive validity, and causality we can kind of set aside as maybe beyond these models a lot of time. But what do you think about it? Those are pretty scattered observations, but how would you come back at those? And I'm going to give you the moral objection, which I think I can articulate better. Ironically, because we just said morals are fake, but yeah, go ahead.
You say that you have a political bias, and to be honest, I'm not sure. Without a political bias, it's becomes, I think, quite difficult to question the evidence, which is not. I mean, in science, there's almost never one piece of evidence that just that everything turns on one experiment, which is a false view of science promoted by some philosophers of science, where there's a crucial experiment where it goes a certain way, and now we all agree that it's established the truth of the new hypothesis. There are many, many lines of evidence, and in the case of a biological basis for race differences in intelligence, everything points in the same direction. It's not just in one particular country the gap proved resistant to change for 50 years. It's in every country where you have population representative sample groups of Africans, Europeans, East Asians, Ashkenazim. You get the same patterns of difference every.
Yeah, so just taking these basic facts of life into consideration, I just don't see how you can develop an intelligent or wise understanding of reality, denying that different groups have different gifts, right? Just such a commonsensical, obvious realization that evolution has worked in effect on people as well as animals, and different peoples evolve completely separately for hundreds of thousands and millions of years, developing different personalities, different forms of social organization, differing levels of intelligence, right? Sometimes it's adaptive to not be so intelligent. If food is easily available, all right, why would you want to burn up, enormous resources thinking about things when, food is just there to grab, year round, right? So in some settings, intelligence is, highly necessary to get through long, nasty winters, all right? Intelligence would probably convey an evolutionary advantage. In other settings, high intelligence, high cognitive labor probably be evolutionarily maladaptive. So it depends on the environment.
Time without any exception. The exceptions people point to are when they're not population representative groups. But when they are representative, it's always the same. It's always the same. When you give intelligence tests, it's the same pattern of differences. You'll get crime rate, it's the same pattern of differences. Legitimacy, educational attainment. And when you come up with some sociological story for the differences in one particular society that might seem plausible, you will be able to find societies where it doesn't apply, and yet you have exactly the same outcomes. And now in the case you said, well, with Saudi Arabia, we have no idea how to turn them Methodist, so that shows that even though an outcome can be cultural, we might not know how to change it. But we do know how to change it. It's just that we don't have the political will or the ability to change it. But if you took everyone in Saudi Arabia and had them adopted at birth and raised by a Methodist, they'd be Methodist. And you could airdrop them back into Saudi Arabia. Now everyone in Saudi Arabia would be Methodist. Now, we do that. We have a version of that for testing race differences, which is cross-racial adoption studies. And it always turns out that by the time they become adults, so heritability of IQ is very low in children. So adoption can have a large effect on IQ in childhood, but as the child grows up, and which are to ages where heritability of IQ become greater and greater, IQ goes down, and by adulthood, blacks who are adopted and raised by white families, their IQ turns out to be roughly the same.
Let me just intrude in a couple of points. So I think on Africa, I think if you're
This is so infuriating. All right, someone who knows his stuff, all right, someone who's learned, all right, is asked hot button questions, or not so much questions, but gets a series of challenges and starts methodically mowing down these challenges, and then gets interrupted, right? So this is how the world works, all right? People will walk all over you to the extent that you allow it, right? People will abuse you to the extent that you allow it. And people should not put up with being abused. If you are an invited guest on a program, you're invited to talk on a hot button issue, you should not put up with being interrupted, particularly by someone who has considerably less learning than you in that area, right? If you allow people to walk all over you, you allow people to interrupt you, right? You allow people to, abuse you, then they'll just keep doing it again and again and again. You have to call it out, and if it's rude and abusive, you may have to be very firm, very loud. You may have to figuratively rip someone's head off to let them know that this is not okay, right? You can't be a doormat.
We're comparing whites in Africa and blacks in Africa. There's just such an obvious differential history, and not just in terms of discrimination, but just in terms of obvious cultural differences. I think it's just not a great example. I understand you can say all these countries, but to me, it seems very intuitive that there would be differences in academic achievement of some person who comes from a tribal background in South Africa, let's say, versus someone whose parents were, physicians or teachers or in Rhodesia. I mean, they just have a totally different cultural context. In terms of the adoption study.
So if I was interviewing Matt about history, where he knows 10 times, 20 times, 50, 100 times more than me, right, I'd be keeping my interjections very rare. I'd keep my questions very short. I'd keep my objections very short, because I'd have a sense of reality that he has 100 times as much knowledge as me in a particular topic. So I may quickly raise an objection or try to sharply form a question with as few words as possible, so that the bloke who knows the most, right, gets into a flow, and gets to share all the stuff he knows. And by comparison, I don't bother people with my relative level of ignorance.
I mean, what I would want to say, and again, I don't want to make this a back and forth on this because I just lack the competence to do it, but there is obviously a difference in socialization for blacks, even if they have white.
Okay, he says he doesn't want to make it a back and forth, but he precisely makes it a back and forth by repeatedly interrupting Cofnas. And so this happens a lot in debates. You'll have a debate or you'll be hosted and people say, okay, let's talk about Israel, for example, but I hope we're not going to say X, Y, Z, right? And the host, the moderator, will try to shut you off from what you're allowed to talk about. So the host here, Matt, says, well, I don't want to make this a back and forth because I don't know anything, but he precisely makes it a back and forth by repeatedly interrupting the guest who actually has expertise in the topic. So you have to call people out when they do this to you, because if you just allow people to roll over you, they will do it again and again and again. So luckily I've done, I don't know, about half a dozen shows with Matt, so I know how he operates. He repeatedly will just bulldoze you. He'll just repeatedly interrupt you again and again and again and again and again. He just can't help himself from interrupting you. So you have to figuratively rip his head off if he starts doing that and let him know, this is not okay. I am going to finish my point, right? So when people start abusing you, you got to, for their sake and for yours, stop. This is not okay. You don't get to abuse me this way. You invited me as a guest on your show. You asked me hot button controversial issues. I get to answer your questions before you interrupt me.
White parents than for white. So, look, the one point I'd make too is, what about the Flynn effect data? I mean, again, I'm sure you've heard all this stuff because I'm not. This isn't my tea. But for me, it's very counterintuitive that Qs have gone up so much with populations. And I understand it doesn't logically follow from that the gap between them could be bridged. But it seems it's pretty compelling to me that, like if you look at the African American population in the United States, they score higher in IQ tests than whites did earlier in the 20th century, I believe, right? So,
but at any given time, there is always a gap. So the Flynn effect affects everybody, and everybody's IQ goes up to a point, and the Flynn effect can't go on forever. But maybe a small amount of the Flynn effect was due to improved nutrition. Most of it was due to education and test taking sophistication, and there's a limit to how much you can improve people's performance by education and that kind of thing. And we've reached, the Flynn effects have maxed out, and it's not going up anymore.
Why is it axiomatic? Why is it axiomatic? Maybe we don't know how to raise it higher. I can accept that. But why is it some axiom?
So Cofnas starts to explain the Flynn effect. And the guy who doesn't know anything by comparison to Nathan Cofnas, interrupts him. It's infuriating.
The problem I have with vegetarians, essentially, the form of argument. They tend to assume, in my view, and again, I am not the best person to argue this with you. By any means.
Right, he understands he's not the best person, so don't argue with him. Just ask very brief questions. But he keeps admitting, I'm not the best person. I really don't know anything compared to you, my guest, and yet he keeps interrupting his guest.
On the subject, so we're going to try to run away from it in a few minutes. But the one point I'd raise is...
yeah, so if you are a guest and the host wants to raise hot-button topics and say that you're highly controversial, but then run away from the topic, no, you don't get to raise a topic with me as a guest and then run away. You don't get to put me in a bad light. You don't get to ride your white horse, and wave your bloody flag, but then interrupt me when I, the guest, have something to say, right? No, you don't get to raise hot button issues, controversial issues, put me in a very, awkward spot, and then run away to some other topics. Don't allow people to pull this crap with you, because people do it all the time.
That intuitively strikes me as weak about the hereditary arguments is they tend to assume that a highly incorrigible difference, which, and you describe this data that the Flynn effect is ending, I believe you, of course. They tend to assume that a highly incorrigible difference is therefore genetic. And it just seems to me that does not follow logically.
But I'm not sure who says that an incorrigible difference.
Well, people aren't going up anymore. People aren't going up anymore.
I mean, there's one piece of evidence in a very large package of evidence. And we also have brain size differences, which track intelligence differences among racial groups, Africans, Europeans, East Asians. You have the entire history of the world being
well, okay, history though. History. I would I'm not
okay, you can
here.
pick apart each
So
piece of evidence.
why are no.
So Cofnas just starts to get going, and rude Matt, abuses him, runs all over him. Matt is the host here. Matt, keeps admitting, I don't know anything compared to you. And yet, just when Cofnas starts to get going, starts to make an answer, rude Matt just abuses him, just runs right over him. The relatively ignorant person keeps interrupting, destroying the flow of the person who actually knows something and doesn't allow him to develop any of his points. So if you're ever a guest in these kind of situations, say, no, I get to finish my point. You don't get to abuse me. You don't get to interrupt me. You don't get to hog the mic. You don't get to go off on all your different tangents and then interrupt me when I start to make sense of your stupidity.
Let me challenge you on history because there I can actually articulate myself. So people in the Near East, including, so for example, Coptic Egyptians, my mother's Coptic Egyptian, they score low. They are descended from the ancient Egyptians as far as we know, right? An incredible civilization. They score low on these tests, right? So are we gonna cash out from that the ancient Egyptians were stupid? I mean, and all the Near Easterners generally score low, including Christians who are not mixed with people from the Gulf or whatever. So I guess the Near Eastern IQ scores tend to me to be an argument in favor of environmentalism because this is the
time to blow the rape whistle and say, I'm being raped here, right? And I'm not down with it.
The cradle of civilization, yet they're low on these tests of cognitive ability.
Well, everybody is an environmentalist to some extent. Everybody acknowledges that the environment affects your score on the test. It's just that the question is, when raised in equal environments, are there gaps on average between? So you can only make this determination if you're comparing populations that are raised under comparable.
So my problem is I think you just cannot. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Nathan. I'll let you finish on this one. I'll do something else. But one last point I make is I think that you are.
So we're talking about 6 times Matt is interrupted here. Has Cofnas gotten more than 60 seconds to ever respond?
Underrating, and I'm not just talking about systematic racism or whatever the left says, but just all kinds of cultural differences, different experiences could be good, bad, or indifferent that people have who are African American versus white in the United States, for example. So I just don't think you can control for environment effectively. You can control for certain variables, but I think there's a lot of stuff we don't understand. But go ahead, you finish and we'll go on.
So I don't have I don't think there are very reliable data on populations outside Africans who we know. Really, we can measure the IQ of Africa by looking at Africans in Western countries who are raised under comparable conditions, which suggests that their genetic potential of most African populations would probably be around 80. African Americans have IQs of around 85 with 25% white admixture. The IQs of India or the Middle East, I don't think we know what their potential is. Because
I guess look, I have political biases on this.
And he interrupts him again. Right? Did Cofnas even get 60 seconds to start to develop a point?
I think we're going to bore the audience. Go back and forth this because I have political biases.
Oh, we're going to bore the audience. Yeah, you're going to bore the audience because the ignorant person keeps interrupting the person who actually knows something.
I'm not well read in the subject. I defend your free speech 100% on it. Carry on with the research, but I don't intuitively buy that we can cash out from these social science models, these claims.
So do you really believe that the Congo and Korea have exactly the same innate potential, and it's just
I'm not describing a view that I have. I'm describing skepticism of a view that you're putting forward. I don't know what the potential of
my view
genetically. Well, there are differences between populations because genetically isolated populations diverge. I'm not in the business of making assertions I don't believe I have adequate evidence for, and it could be my lack of reading, but I don't believe I have adequate evidence for assigning potential intelligence to a group of people that have just had a radically different experience than in the Western world or Korea, so.
Well, they have. Where does the different experiences come from, and why are they acculturated differently? This is related to another thing I think we're going to talk about, which is the Jewish question, because my explanation for why are there Jews everywhere in prominent positions is largely due to intelligence differences. Now, if you say, well, there's no difference between Jews and anyone else, then the conspiracy explanation becomes much more very attractive.
This actually goes to a transition question I have, and it relates to just kind of putting the bow on this race realism stuff. So we agree that the differences in academic achievement and ability exist. That's just a fact on these tests, right? Why is that not enough to fight we'd agree to fight together, like DEI, affirmative action, these things. Like I'm 100% against this stuff. I think it's Sisyphean to try to make all groups equal in society. But why is it enough just to say there are these differences, and we don't know how to change them? Why do we have to make incendiary? And again, I defend your right to do it. You shouldn't be punished. And if anyone goes after you, I'll sign any petition you want me to. But why do we have to make arguments that are incendiary? That is there any political benefit to it? Like why can't what is wrong with my argument that these differences exist? We don't know how to change them. Therefore, we're gonna if we do these DEI things, affirmative action things, it's gonna have less meritocracy.
I don't understand why you're against DEI if you think that potentially everyone has the same capacity.
Because they don't right now. Eventually, yeah, sure, maybe.
But
they don't right now.
Theoretically,
we don't know how to change it.
We could change.
Sure.
There is
Sure.
some way. You say we don't know. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's find out. Maybe it's.
We should keep trying, but we shouldn't.
Trying.
No, but we shouldn't be rigging.
That's what
We shouldn't
wokeism
be. No. Wokeism says, look, conservative view is this is the world as it is. These differences exist, right? We have to deal with the world as it is. We can't be like having doctors that are less competent because we want to do social engineering and equal outcomes and change something that comes about through, let's say, history, right, or culture. We don't know how to change this, and we have to just live with the world we have. I think you don't think that's a coherent argument?
You're saying the world we have is one in which African Americans could have the same outcomes as Ashkenazim or Japanese Americans.
I don't think that is
they could. It's
intuitively ruled out.
How to produce that, but
right.
They could, but they have the same potential to achieve in the same way as.
Yeah, but we don't know how to turn.
Okay, we don't know.
Cultures into each other.
But the most important thing we could possibly do is find out. Why? Because there's an enormous loss of potential and suffering. People having bad outcomes with dealing with crime and frustration and poverty.
Well, crime we can deal with through other means. Then we don't need to culturally engineer. We need to just have a more vigorous approach to crime, and also a more humane prisons. Like I think.
Okay, so your solution is toss them in prison, but
right. Well, keep them better in prison too.
We could arrange
people better in prison.
The environment so they don't need to go to prison.
We don't know how to do this. Clearly, we don't.
But if they are the same, if they have the same potential, we need to figure out how to bring about this outcome because it should be possible.
So let's say let's go back to the example of the Near East, right? Let's say that like Coptic Egyptians score low on these tests, right? Let's say Egyptians have the same potential. Maybe they don't. Maybe they do. I don't know. Whatever you think. Let's say they had the same potential as Swedes. Should we really be like investing in some Manhattan Project to transform their culture? I mean, it seems. Also, why do we know it would work? Like it just, I guess the main premise which I fall back on, I might get away from this because I'm just not competent in the technical literature that you are, is that I think that to say a difference is incorrigible, and I'm not saying that's your only argument, but I'm saying I've heard this from many of these people, that to say a difference is incorrigible does not follow it is not the fireman.
Okay, so if
you're ever interviewing someone who is competent and literate in the technical literature and you realize that you are not, then keep your points very, very short and don't talk over the person who actually knows something.
And for me, at least, the flip effect stuff.
Damn. So we're talking a dozen times here in 20 minutes of what could be a thoughtful, interesting discussion, right? Matt just abuses his guest.
Me some more additional skepticism because I don't think many people would intuitively think, well, the African American community today is intellectually superior to whites for most of American history, which is what the data seem to show.
So North Korea is one, I don't know exactly, one of the poorest countries in the world, right? People starving, huge parts of the country, basically everything outside the capital, extremely undeveloped, primitive in every way. If the North Korean regime fell and they opened their borders, then the world would show what they think of their potential. There would be a Manhattan Project. There would be everybody would be investing in North Korea because we know that even though it's the poorest country in the world, in 40 years they're going to be exporting computer chips.
Maybe
because we know that.
Why is Ukraine before the war? Obviously, the war is you can't talk about. Why before the war did Ukraine have a lower GDP per capita than Botswana?
This is a great point that Nathan Cofnas was just starting to develop when he gets run over by a rude host.
I mean, Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in the world. They're overwhelmingly white.
Okay, it's caught in a tug of war with the West and Russia. I don't think that anything I'm saying implies that environment can't affect outcomes.
Right, you're not implying
and
that.
There can be political factors that stand in the way of certain interventions that ideally we would like to perform.
I guess the one point I fall back on, and then I'm going to run away from this because, again, I know I'm not competent on this subject, but and I care about it. Like I have a political bias against your view, so I'm not going to pretend that's not the case. But I just think that just because we can't change something, we haven't figured out how to do it yet. In the context.
So Matt, that also is illustrating something here. You can get away with a lot in life if you both if you're just honest, right? So he's honest that he doesn't really know much in this area, and he's honest that he's got a political bias. So if you're honest and upfront with people, even though he's incredibly abusive and rude as a host, right, it's so much easier to forgive because the guy's, straightforward about where he's coming from.
Stuff like social policy, which is a very clumsy, and education, which is a very clumsy politically influenced domain. I don't think it follows that. I don't think that's strong evidence that we can't do it. And I also don't think that we need to just say, okay, let's just change every standard and abandon meritocracy to achieve racial equity. I think you can make a very coherent argument against these things without. We disagree on that maybe, but I think you can make a very coherent argument that just says the differences exist. We don't know how to change them, so we're not going to make the admissions process, institutions, or admit people to medical school with lower MCAT. I mean, there's many reasons not to do that without like these arguments. But you have a free speech right to engage in them. And I guess that leads to my next question. Have you, for these views, how on earth did you get? I mean, like, I'm on the political right, and I'm like slightly, I want to defend your free speech rights, and I do, but slightly like, ooh, But how on earth did you get a position at Cambridge with your viewpoints? Like, how did some woke people try to go after you? It's just it's remarkable to me that you did. I mean, I'm glad you haven't been terminated or anything, but how did that happen?
Well, I wasn't hired on the basis of my work on race differences. Other things which doesn't always get as much attention on Twitter, but actually most of my work was on philosophy of biology and metaethics. That was what I was hired for. The UK is about 10 years behind the United States when it comes to wokeism.
Agreed with you.
So I never got a job in the United States. I've generally been a lot more successful in the UK. After I was hired, there were 2 petitions to fire me. So first there was a very kind of weak hit piece in the student newspaper, and that was picked up by the Daily Mail. So I was in the Daily Mail as they're saying I'm a racist. And then there were 2 student petitions.
Daily Mail is like really trashy tabloid, though, right?
Yeah, they just publish any garbage that will get clicks.
They don't really have politics. I think they just want to like have really inflammatory shocking headlines.
No, it's just for clicks. That's what I care about.
Go on, yeah.
And interestingly, both petitions to fire me were started by American students,
like female Americans,
women, both women from America.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like my experience in Britain, I have to say, my first year, I was like at LSE, I was kind of hunkered down. I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm not going to say anything I don't believe, but I'm ready to be like blasted with both barrels from woke people. And no, it never really happened. And yeah, I think it's in terms of the feminism, it's more woke than it is in terms of like race politics. I mean, I think it may be too because the British have a pretty compelling rhetorical narrative that's snappy. Like if people say, "Oh, the colonialism, you're so evil," white British people, like they can just say, "Well, like British Empire is the one of the prime reasons that slavery, at least in the old sense of traditional sense of slavery, is largely a thing of the past in the world."
Well, also they seem to be more worked up about the trans stuff.
Yeah, I know that.
Even in America, I know it's a big thing in America, but they're really out of their minds when it comes to trans stuff in the UK.
Yeah, so I noticed that gets a lot of oxygen. Yeah.
So there's a controversial Matt Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? Got into trouble with Twitter. And I just saw a brief thing on Twitter that's the best critique of the Matt Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? So I think that there is a time and a place to be deceptive. But if you're going to be deceptive, as the makers of What is a Woman were, then it puts a much greater burden on you. And so here is a 2-minute critique of What is a Woman. And I think it's a very fair and important critique.
Question for you. How would you feel if I invited you to be on my documentary? But I invite you using a fake name. I've made up a fictional organization. I lie to you about the premise of the film. I lie to you about who's producing it. I don't tell you that I plan to use the film to mock you, that it will incite harassment and death threats against you. Let's talk about What is a Woman, a documentary produced by Matt Walsh and his team at the Daily Wire. What is a Woman? To be honest, it's just a movie version of the things you usually see on Daily Wire's website. It's just a lot of gender ideology movement and, like, misgendering. That's all just table stakes with these people, so let's just leave that aside. What you do need to know about this movie is that the Daily Wire and its employees created this elaborate ruse of fake names and fake organizations to trick people into being in the film. We're not talking like, oh, they exaggerated or lied by omission. No, they fully made shit up. I know this because my college professor contacted me recently to let me know he's in the film without his consent. Sure, he agreed to be in a film, but not this one. He shared the emails with me and now I'm making them public for the first time. Let's look at a Daily Wire interview request. My professor didn't hear from the Daily Wire. He heard from a woman named Rebecca Dobkovitz. She contacted him about an independent documentary about transgender and LGBTQ communities. When she asked for a funding source, she said they were being funded by a benevolent source that would like to remain anonymous. My professor says that when he arrived to do the interview, they hid Matt Walsh from him until the interview started. That way they could still capture some footage, just in case he recognized Matt. The key thing here is that my professor revoked consent in writing once he found out what this film was really about, but they just ignored his emails. All of this, by the way, squares with what a trans activist named Eli Ehrlich shared with the public last year. Last February, Eli said that she was contacted by someone named McKenna Lynn from the Gender Unity Project. McKenna represented herself as a curious and well-heeled grad student who was self-funding her own documentary about the LGBT community. But Eli did some digging and learned that McKenna Lynn was really McKenna Waters, a producer for Matt Walsh. She also learned that they didn't just make a website for their fake organization, they actually registered it as a real LLC. That LLC is registered to Justin Folk, the director of What is a Woman. Daily Wire hasn't shut the fuck up about this documentary since they launched it last year. But this they never mentioned.
Okay, I think that's a pretty fair critique and a different perspective on the Matt Walsh documentary that gets so much traction in right-wing circles. Okay, one of the dumbest things going on in the news media, and particularly popular with populist right-wing pundits such as Tucker Carlson, is all this conspiracy theorizing about UFOs. All right, and it's just so many acquaintances of mine are really, thinking that there's something in this, this new talk, new revelations about UFOs. All right, I don't buy any of this UFO stuff. It seems completely far-fetched. It just seems absolutely moronic. And luckily, Decoding the Gurus did a pretty good interview on their Patreon here with Mick West, a journalist, on UFOs and conspiracy psychology.
Are skeptical after what's already revealed and what more is promised to be delivered. But I'm wondering, from the deep dive that you've done into the material that's been released, how you would characterize what's come out over the past couple of years with these releases.
It's not very compelling in terms of making the case that these are alien spaceships or even any kind of advanced technology. There's really nothing in any of the videos that unambiguously demonstrates anything anomalous. And there's a lot of the videos that come out, not just these three older videos, but some of the newer videos, that initially people say this is the best UFO video of all time. And then when you do a bit of analysis of it, it just shows nothing. And that's true for things that were leaked. There was a famous green triangle video that came out like 2 or 3 years ago. And the guy who released that, Jeremy Corbell, was saying, this is the best government-sourced UFO video of all time. And this was the big headline at the time. And like 10 minutes after he released the video, I pointed out what it actually was, which was these green triangles, which is just a camera artifact. And everyone was like, no, Mick, that can't be right. Jeremy Corbell said it was like a flying pyramid. And Corbell says that people on the ship said it was a flying pyramid. And he had all these witnesses saying it was a flying pyramid. But then I matched up the video to a star map. You can see, this triangle here is this star, this triangle is this star, and all these triangles match stars. There's one triangle that's flying along, and it's flashing, and the flashing of the lights is pretty much identical to the navigation lights of a 737. So instead of it being like a video of amazing flying UFOs that are pyramid shaped, it turned out to be a video of some stars and a plane flying over. And this type of thing is kind of indicative of a lot of things. Like one is the claims people make, but also people in the military make mistakes. This video, I did the analysis, but like about a year later, there was a congressional hearing where they showed the same video, and then they explained essentially that my analysis was correct. They didn't mention me or anything, but they said that this is a camera artifact. They didn't say there were stars. They hadn't even got to that bit yet. They're doing that now. They said recently that they're going to look at some star maps, and they're going to try to fully close this case. But I figured it out 2 years ago. But they also released some new videos at the time, and 2 of the videos they released had audio. And the audio was the guy who was called the Snoopy team leader, which sounds like a silly name, but Snoopy stands for like systems operations and integration or something, some acronym. But it's basically the people who are tasked with taking video and photos of things that approach the ship. So they stand on the bow or the railings, and they have the really big cameras or the night vision, and they take video of things. So this guy's talking about what he's looking at, and he's saying, Snoopy team leader, blah 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 blah. I'm at this location, this time, this angle, this speed, looking at 3 unidentified aerial systems, which is military speak for drones, essentially. And they're showing this video, and there's these 3 things, these 3 triangles in the sky. But those 3 triangles, they weren't drones. They were stars. There weren't even any flashing lights in this one. It was just 3 stars that he was looking at. And this happened twice. These are 2 different videos. The exact same thing. Like the guy's like, USS Russell looking at the bow. This is like unidentified aerial system, which is I think he said like 400 feet off the bow. And it was the star, I can't remember, it was a Capella, I think. So it's a known star. Only said it was flashing red, green, and white, which is the colors that the Capella flashes. It's one of those stars that twinkles in different colors. So military people make mistakes, and this has been revealed over and over again. They released a video of what they said was a drone in infrared, but it was actually a plane. And they haven't even owned up to that one yet. It's obviously a plane. Anyone can see it's a plane. But there's this kind of, I don't know, there's this thread of mistakes running through all of this UFO stuff coming from the government.
And I guess it shouldn't be surprising, should it? I mean, the atmosphere and even the ocean is visually speaking, an inherently ambiguous place. And people...
Wow. Laura, is it Laura Schlesinger? No, that's Dr. Laura, but Laura Ingram, man, she's had really bad lip job. I mean, I have seen so many awful lip jobs that are just painful to look at. It has to be the plastic surgery procedure with the worst success rate. I just see time and again, public personalities who have a lip job, and it always looks awful. Ugh. All right, back to Mick West here talking with Decoding the Gurus.
Well, and it is unlike sort of normal objects that are maybe closer to us and you might encounter in everyday life. Things are often like ungrounded, so it seems like it should be quite easy for people to make to make errors when assessing things they see.
Sure, but when you're what they call the trained observer, this is something that's very big in the UFO community. They say this was observed by trained observers, and here we have examples of someone who not just pilots who are trained to fly a plane and look for other things. They're not really trained to observe things. These are people whose only job is to observe. They're trained observers of things coming towards the ship, and they were mistaking stars for drones. I mean, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And people are reporting things on video. Like these triangles, went up the chain of command, and people were investigating it. And it wasn't they said it was a year later that they figured out that these triangles were actually just artifacts of the camera. I mean, they've had this video, and it's there's this bizarre triangle swarming the ship. It says no, they're artifacts of the camera, and they're actually stars. Which is, I'm sure they'll release a little report on that. I think it's coming in August or something, but they might push it till next year. But they'll eventually admit that these things are stars. But yeah, it's not a good look. And even the more recent videos, they're showing videos now saying, "Look, we've solved this case." And they show a video, and it's like 3 dots moving around on the screen, and you can tell obviously it's just the cameras moving around that's making these dots move around. And they were saying this is something that we all thought was anomalous at the start. The pilots couldn't figure out what it was. They tried to catch up with these 3 dots, but they couldn't catch up with them. And it was just 3 planes off in the distance, and it was moving around because the camera was moving around. They couldn't catch it up because it was 100 miles away. And there's more. I mean, I could keep going, but you get the idea here. It's what's going on.
The interesting thing there is a little bit that I find it fascinating with the UFO community that they have a kind of selective charity which they apply, whereby eyewitness accounts, like you said, trained pilots or whatever that have accounts of observing a UFO are treated as if to disagree or to at least to propose alternative explanations for what they observed is like insulting of their expertise. But on the other hand, they're very clear that you should always be skeptical of everything that the government says and does. So it's like there's a hyper skepticism towards any narrative that contradicts or it says that they investigated UFOs and they didn't find enough evidence to find it credible. And then on the other hand, there's like a hyper charity or credibility extended to eyewitness testimony. And it's interesting because it's often in the same conversation, sometimes in the same paragraph, that both of those approaches are deployed. It must be frustrating to deal with.
Yeah, it's kind of understandable though that you would treat 2 things differently. One is kind of an organization doing things, and the other one is an individual doing things, just speaking for themselves. So if you think like a government spokesperson saying we don't know anything about UFOs, it's very different to a pilot saying I saw a UFO once. So you think the government spokesperson is doing their job. Pilots, their job isn't to lie to people about seeing UFOs. So I think it's kind of understandable that you would get that. But there is this kind of a veneration for pilots and military pilots in particular. And if I say things about pilots, not about them, but just to question their account, it's viewed sometimes as a grave insult that I really should apologize for. What I'm doing is saying, well, maybe he was a bit mistaken in judging the size of this object or the distance away that this object is. And that's basically all I'm saying, that pilots are humans. They can make mistakes. And pilots do make mistakes. I've been talking about the other mistakes. Pilots themselves, they're not immune to mistakes. Sometimes pilots fly into the ground because they misjudged how high they were off the ground. This is something that happens. There's a famous UFO pilot, Commander David Fravor. He didn't fly into the ground. He's a great pilot. But he says that when he was engaging with this Tic Tac object, this supposed Tic Tac object, he very deliberately flew down very slowly. And he explains why he does this. He's explained this several times. He says, the sky, the sea looks the same from 2,000 feet as it does from 8,000 feet. So if you're not careful, you'll misjudge your altitude and you'll fly into the ocean. So you should descend towards the ocean surface slowly. So he's admitting there that pilots make mistakes. mistakes, and you have to be careful, and you have to be aware of these mistakes. And yet we're also meant to take everything that he says about the observations of a Tic Tac object that he's never seen before as being like, the word of law, like written in stone. It must have happened exactly like that, when it probably didn't.
Yeah, you must respect the lived experience of UFO conspiracy-minded theorizers. So where have I been the past 9 days? Haven't done any live streams for about 9 days. Well, I guess the more good things I've got going on in my life, the more love I've got in my life, the more human connection that I've got going on in my life, the less inclination I have to live stream. Also, I like to periodically take a good step back for a few days, a week or so, and just reassess, what the hell am I doing? Let me just spend more time reading, contemplating, journaling, stuff like that, instead of just doing these live streams out of habit. But, question how I spend my time, my resources, what I want to do here, what exactly am I going to, contribute to the stream of life? What can I do that is helpful to people? Okay, I think that will do it for now. Back to the love. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.